Lori laughed. Until yesterday, I'd only been with one man period in my whole life. Honestly? I feel honored. Why do you ask? Lori asked. Perhaps it is time you try it, he replied with his voice raising slightly at the end. Lori stopped and looked up at him, questioningly. Just then, the tent flap opened and Matt crawled in. Lori quickly moved to pull her dress down to make sure she was covered. What's going on? Jacob smiled. I think you know. It'll be fun. Lori wasn't sure, but Matt was already taking off his clothes. It wasn't but a minute or so and she found herself sitting between two men. One 12 years older than her and the other 8 years younger. Both men were fit, although Matt was slightly thinner. Both men had nice skin, although Matt's was softer looking. Both men had similar looks and hair, although Matt was younger with less gray in his hair. Lori still wasn't sure, but the four hands that were starting to caress her body were helping her make up her mind. Seems like you like it. He smiled. He pulled the sundress over her head and pushed her onto her back. Lori felt like she was in a trance as she let herself be guided. Lori couldn't believe how wonderful it felt. It wasn't the best feeling ever, but it certainly was the easy one she'd ever had. She didn't even have to concentrate on it. The intense feelings of the situation were enough. A few moments later, all three collapsed. That was incredible, she panted. Both men grunted their agreement. It felt great. I've never felt Tom like that, she said. Matt chimed in, if you liked it, perhaps you'd like some more. Lori smiled. She wasn't sure she liked the idea, but she tried not to think about it as she got on her hands and knees. Jacob handed Lori a towel and she cleaned up as best she could. I can't believe that 24 hours ago I had only been with one man my whole life and now I've had two men twice even and neither one was my husband. And it was great, wasn't it? I never imagined it could be this good, she replied with a grin. Lori slipped the sundress over her head and tried to make herself look presentable. Jacob had pulled on a pair of shorts and t-shirt. Matt, alone, stayed naked. Lori asked, aren't you planning on getting dressed? Matt looked at her and smiled. Actually, watching you get dressed, I was just wondering how I could possibly talk you into one more time. Lori laughed. Matt did it again. May we did it again, Lori? Lori laid back. Go ahead. Matt wasted no time. Finally satisfied, Matt began to dress. Lori pulled her dress back down. Jacob said, you'd better get cleaned up before Tom gets back. Lori smiled, I'll see you later. She crawled out of the tent and walked toward the shower building. She hoped that no one approached her, because they would easily notice her lack of underclothes. Back in Jacob's tent, Matt said, Dad, that was great. She is hot. Think we'll ever get the chance to do that again? I'm sure she'll be willing to do whatever I want her to, Jacob replied. He reached over into a pile of clothes in the corner of the tent and pulled out a hidden camcorder. Popping out the tape inside, he added, anything. Having been unfaithful to her husband twice in 2 days, was relieved and saddened that their camping trip had been cut short. Instead of staying an entire week, she and her husband, Tom, had been forced to leave on the third day due to a family emergency. She figured that having it with Tom's 40-year-old boss, Jacob, and his son was a one-time thing. A little tryst that only happened because she was away from home and felt like letting herself go. Up until the camping trip, Lori had only been with one man in her entire life, her husband. It was some of the best she'd ever had, partly from the excitement of it being taboo and, probably, partly from the two men being much better than her husband. She had never had any complaints about Tom and he almost always satisfied her, but these two had opened her eyes to a whole new world. Although she felt guilty for cheating on her husband, she was glad that she had gotten to experience that at least once in her life. Lori even managed to try something new with them. She had never done that with Tom, but now she thought she might like to. The only problem was how would she bring it up to him? That was definitely something that she wanted to do again, but after 5 years of marriage, how could she get Tom to try that? Tom had just left on a business trip to California. He was meeting with a possible new client that would take Jacob's young computer company to a new level. This would be their first nationwide customer and would mean a huge increase in earnings. As Jacob's right-hand man, Tom would definitely reap financial rewards if he managed to land this contract. In fact, Jacob flat out told him that an immediate bonus in the upper 4-digit was his upon completion of the deal. Lori didn't like to stay alone, but knowing the benefits that this trip could offer, she accepted that Tom would be gone for 3 nights. When she kissed him goodbye at the airport, he promised to call after dinner that night. As a school teacher, Lori enjoyed having her summers off. With the first week of August at hand, she knew that she only had about 2 weeks before she'd have to start getting ready for the school year. She decided to spend the time that Tom was away relaxing, catching up on her reading, and working on her tan. Without Tom there to mess it up, she knew that she wouldn't have to do any housework, so she would have plenty of free time. When she returned from the airport after seeing Tom off, the answer machine was blinking. She checked the called ID and saw that it was a call from Tom's work. She hoped that it wasn't something important, because Tom had just left. She pressed the button on the answering machine. Jacob's voice came out of the speaker. "Lori, could you give me a call when you get this message? I'm having a party at my house tonight and need a favor." Lori thought for a moment. Was Jacob already making another move on her? Tom wasn't even gone or an hour. Or was she just being silly? Was it something completely innocent? She pondered those thoughts for a few minutes, then realized that she wouldn't get any answer that way, so she picked up the phone and dialed Jacob's office. The secretary put her through to Jacob. He said, "Lori, glad you called. I'm giving a party for one of my friends tonight. However, I just got a call from one of the waitresses I had hired. She's sick and can't come. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind filling in." "Waitress? What exactly would I have to do?" "Mostly just serve drinks and appetizers," Jacob replied. "I'll pay you what the other girl would have gotten, $150. $150? For how long?" "If you get to my house by 6, that'll be fine. These things usually last until a little past midnight." "Okay, I guess I can do that." "Great. I'll see you at 6. Don't worry about clothes, I'll have a uniform for you." They exchanged goodbyes and hung up. Lori passed the day nervously. She wondered what exactly would be expected of her at the party. Probably wouldn't be that hard, but she was surprised that he would have a uniform for her. She didn't realize that he held such formal parties, but then again, the company had been doing very well, so his financial status was well above hers and Tom's. Jacob's house was huge and it probably made it easier for him to be with his guests if he had a few people helping making runs to the kitchen for snacks. At 5:30, Lori was just about ready to leave for Jacob's house when the phone rang. It was Tom. He told her about his trip and his day. They small talked for a while. When he asked her if she had any plans, she told him that she was going to be a waitress at Jacob's party. She explained that she didn't know what kind of party it was, but it sounded rather formal, because he was going to have a uniform for her and everything. Tom thought it was odd, because Jacob hadn't mentioned anything about a party or him calling Lori, but he told her to have fun and tell him all about it tomorrow. Lori hung up and drove the couple miles to Jacob's house. She had done up her hair and makeup, but was wearing just jeans and a t-shirt. Jacob showed her in and introduced her to Tammy, the other waitress. She was a very good-looking blonde about 10 years younger than Lori. He introduced them to Walt, a middle-aged Italian-looking man. He was the chef and was dressed accordingly. He would be in the kitchen the entire night. Matt, Jacob's son, would serve as bartender. He was set up at a bar at the far end of large game room that would serve as the main room for the party. A large video screen with comfortable chairs was at the opposite end of the room from the bar. In the middle, there were several games, such as pinball machines, a foosball table, a pool table, and some poker tables. Jacob said, "The first guests will be here in about 15 minutes. Upstairs in the first bedroom on the left are your uniforms. Go on up and put them on, I'll be up to check on you in a few minutes." Tammy and Lori went upstairs. The two uniforms were stacked on the bed. Tammy immediately started to disrobe. Lori noticed that Tammy's chest were much larger than her own and her stomach was flatter. She felt a little uncomfortable, but slipped off her t-shirt and jeans. She picked up the white apron and realized that there was little else to go with it. Just a pair of black lacy French-cut bikini shorts. Lori was standing and held the apron in front of herself. "I can't wear this. It's obscene." Tammy replied, "What's the big deal? Everything is covered." Lori put the apron on, making sure to tie the belt tight to keep her covered. "What kind of party is this?" "Certainly, I can't go in public like this." Tammy looked surprised. "Didn't Jacob tell you? It's a bachelor party." "Wait a minute. What are we here for?" "Relax. We just have to serve drinks and snacks. I've worked a few of these parties. It's no big deal. Sometimes the guys even tip you. You don't have to do anything special. Although, a couple of the guys try to cop a feel. Do you let them? I don't really care. It's hard to stop a guy from grabbing you when you have a tray in your hands. They're harmless." Just then, Jacob walked in. "You two look beautiful. Are you all set?" Tammy nodded and walked out. Lori said, "I'm not sure about this." "Why?" "I'm not sure I can go in front of a group of men." "What would Tom say?" "He'll only know if you tell him. Anyway, most of these men are strangers. You'll probably never see them again. It's just a little teasing." "Most are strangers? Do you mean I'll know some of them?" "One of the programmers from the company is invited, Josh Adams." Josh Adams was a cocky, young college graduate. Lori didn't know him too well. The few times she had met him, he seemed nice and was relatively good-looking, but that's all she remembered. Hopefully, he won't recognize her, she thought. Let's go. The guests will be here soon. With that, Jacob led her downstairs. Immediately on entering the game room, she saw Matt at the bar. He looked her up and down and smiled. She was just about to approach him when the doorbell rang. Within about 15 minutes, about 30 men had filled the game room. She and Tammy dutifully brought the men drinks and snacks. At first, she felt uncomfortable, being so scantily dressed, but she quickly got over it and started to mingle a little with the men in between trips to the kitchen or bar. She flinched the first time a man touched her, the second time too, but soon, she even got used to that. Around 8 o'clock, Josh Adams approached her. She offered him an hors d'oeuvre. He took it with one hand while running his other hand down her. She stood motionless as the hand slid around to her and gave it a gentle squeeze. She gave him a courteous grin and prepared to move on, but he said, "I'd like another." Reaching for a snack off the tray, she froze. This was the most intrusive most anyone had made. She glanced around to see if anyone was watching, but they weren't. She didn't want to make a scene, but she didn't know what to do. She squirmed trying to get away. Another guest approached. He whispered, "Tom's a lucky man," and walked away. Damn, she thought. Not only had she just had stroked by Josh, but he clearly knew that she was Tom's wife. She decided that she needed to avoid him for the rest of the night if she could. Glancing at the clock, she realized there was still over 4 hours to go. She headed for the safety of the bar. Jacob made an announcement that the first of the night's planned entertainment would now begin. It was a porn movie on the big screen. Most of the men moved over and watched the film, making comments and joking about it. Lori was behind the bar. She asked Matt, "How can you guys watch this stuff? The women look fake and the guys are ridiculous. I won't even mention that corny music or the horrid dialogue." Matt laughed. "It's not the music and dialogue, that's for sure. And I don't look at the guys, but the women. Do they actually turn you on? Come see for yourself." He turned and revealed that the front of his pants were tented out. Lori laughed. Matt, look around, maybe you cowl, you know. Lori was shocked. "You've got to be kidding. Come on, no one will know. The bar is high enough and they're all watching the movie. I'm really suffering here." Lori looked then at him and shook her head, but Matt gently pushed her downward. Lori got to her knees. It quickly brought back memories. No one knew what she was doing. She listened as the sounds from the men in the background grew more enthusiastic. The film soundtrack seemed about the same, but the action on screen must be getting good, she thought. Lori started to pick up speed. Matt's knees felt weak, but what heightened the excitement of the situation was knowing that 30 men were watching Lori on the television screen. Hidden from her view, a small video camera was recording every movement of her. The men were still watching the movie on the screen and no one seemed any the wiser. She served drinks for the next hour and got more than a few strange looks, but she didn't think much of it. A few men got a little bolder. She always broke away quickly, but the men got more than a few jollies. When she quizzed Tammy, she found that the men were not being quite as playful as Jacob called it with her. She thought maybe she was being too friendly with the guys and thought she had better be a little more careful. Around 10, Jacob announced that the next phase of entertainment would begin. It was what Lori was expecting all night. The typical entertainment at a bachelor party, a stripper. Lori figured this was a good time to take a break. She went upstairs and sat on the bed in the guest room. She could hear the men cheering. The door opened and Jacob came in. "There you are. I just wanted to check on you, make sure you were okay. I just needed to rest for a few minutes." "That's fine. In fact, I have just the thing to help you relax. Close your eyes." Lori shrugged and closed her eyes. She could hear Jacob start to move around. "What are you doing?" "It's a surprise, keep your eyes closed, no peeking." Jacob set the small camera on the dresser. He piled his clothes neatly around the camera to completely conceal it. He stood in front of Lori. "Okay, open your eyes." Lori opened her eyes and gasped as she saw Jacob's just a few feet in front of her. "Jacob, what are you doing?" He stepped toward her. Lori hesitated for a moment. Downstairs, the men were cheering loudly as they were treated to Lori's on the big screen. He figured the men downstairs had seen enough time for him to get some. Jacob finished and stood up. He went to the guest bathroom and returned with a towel. He picked up his clothes with the camera still hidden inside. He walked to the bed, making sure that the camera got a good view, and handed her the towel. He went in the bathroom and dressed, returning a few minutes later fully clothed. Lori was beginning to dress. Hiding the camera under his shirt, he quickly exited the room. As Lori dressed, she heard a roar and applause from the men downstairs. She figured that the stripper had finished and she should get back down there before anyone wondered where she was. A few minutes later, she was walking down the stairs into the living room. Many of the men were heading for the door. A few gave her compliments on the was past, such as, "Good job, tonight, you made a lot of men happy tonight, hope to see you again soon," etc. She thought they seemed kind of odd, but she just nodded to each of them as they left, happy that she had done a good job serving them. By midnight, only Jacob, Matt, and Josh Adams remained in the game room. Tammy and Walt were in the kitchen, cleaning up. Lori was gathering the dirty glasses from around the room. As she passed in front of Josh's chair, he grabbed her and stopped her. "We got interrupted before," he said. "Stop that." "No way, I want some of Tom's wife's too." Josh smirked. Lori looked at Jacob, questioningly. He pushed a button on the remote and the giant screen was suddenly filled with Matt and Jacob with Lori in the tent. He pushed another button and the image changed to that of Matt. Once more he pressed a button, changing the image to the scene where she was in the guest room a few hours before. Shocked, she asked, "How could you?" Jacob just shrugged. Then her attention was shifted back to Josh. "Just a little fun," Josh said, "and your husband never finds out." Lori knew she was stuck. She didn't like Josh in the least, but if she didn't let him, he may tell Tom and she couldn't let that happen. So, she went with it as Josh slowly guided her to the floor. "Well?" she asked. "I'm not done yet," he replied. This was a first for her. Tom had never even suggested it and the idea, frankly, didn't turn her on at all. Josh smiled and nodded. "Just relax," he said. Suddenly, the kitchen door opened and Walt and Tammy walked in. Tammy took off her apron and walked straight to Matt. They kissed and fell onto one of the chairs. Lori was getting used to it, although she didn't appreciate it. Suddenly, she saw Walt. She knew immediately what they were planning. She couldn't believe that a little over a week ago she was a one-woman man and now. How did she get here? Did it matter? Suddenly, it was over. She came back to earth. The men stood and stepped back. Lori lay on the ground at their feet. If there was any doubt before, now it was clear, she had become a total S. She was exhausted, so she spent the night at Jacob's house. Or was it for another reason? Either way, she was with Jacob the entire night. In the morning she headed home to await Tom's phone call. She'd tell him the truth, she had a good time at the party and the work was fun even when it got hard.